Hello, everyone. This
Hello.
is the 201st episode of the Soccer Nostalgia Talk Podcast. As always, this is Sean from Los Angeles and the Soccer Nostalgia blog. For this episode, I interview Belgian Standard Liège fans, Mr. Philippe Neyens and Mr. Gery Lefebvre, as we discuss Standard Liège during the decade of the 1980s. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Can you introduce yourselves and your trajectory into football?
Right. So I'm Philippe Neyens. I'm 53. I started to assist standard games at the stadium in Sclessin from the year 1983. I've been to many seasons. I had my season ticket, not the last 15 seasons because of my work, but I'm still a dedicated fan of Standard Liège.
I was born in Liège, Belgium, back in the early 70s, and you could say that I'm pretty much genetically connected to Standard Liège. My grandfather and dad were diehard fans since the 50s, and they took me to my first game in 1977. So I was just 5 years old. I've had a season ticket ever since, rarely missed a game, even during the tough times of the club. Now I go to the stadium with my two sons who are 18 and 24. So the family tradition is still going strong. I also played in Standard Youth Academy from about 11 to 16, which really deepened my bond with the club. So for me, Standard isn't just a team, it's part of who I am. My blood is red and white. I've stuck with them through everything, and just like so many other loyal supporters, I would say, but Standard fans are known for their loyalty, and I'm proud to be one of them.
Welcome to both of you. Let's go back in time. What was the status of Standard Liège in the Belgian and European football landscape as we come to the beginning of the decade of the 1980s?
Yeah, Standard was still an historic name in Belgian football at that time, but not quite in the spotlight anymore because of Anderlecht and Bruges, Club Brugge. Our last league title was back in 71, and while we were in European competitions, the dominance of Standard in Belgium had faded. Yet Standard still had that aura from the golden years, especially the late 60s, when the club was at the top in Belgium and sometimes in Europe. We were living off the glory for European successes and domestic dominance from that era. But you know that our European credibility was sealed with that semi-final run in the 61-62 European Cup when we met Real Madrid. So in the 70s, it was the more difficult because of Club Brugge and Anderlecht that often overshadowed Standard. But we were still a kind of sleeping giant, rich in tradition and with passionate support.
Yes, I agree. Standard had the best years, the best period in the late 60s and the early 70s. At that time, Standard was really the team number one in Belgium. But then the rest of the 70s were a bit down. Bruges came in the light at that moment. Before that, Club Bruges was not such a big thing. And they came really in the big lights in the late 70s with the finals against Liverpool, two finals against Liverpool that they lost. In Europe, Standard was a bit forgotten. We had very good years with big games against Madrid, Celtic Glasgow, and others. We were the first Belgian team to actually perform high in the European Cups. But at that moment, it was a good time for the Belgian football. Belgian football was rival to any other league at that time. Standard was a bit down. It was time for Standard to do something to get back to the top.
Roger Petit had been the general secretary of the club since 1945. What was his role in the growth of the club in the previous decades and the renaissance of the club in the 1980s?
Roger Petit was really the mastermind behind the club's transformation from after the World War II to 84. He really turned Standard into more than just a provincial club. He was like a strategist and an architect who took the club to national and European heights. After World War II, Belgian football was quite amateur, and Petit saw the need to modernize Standard, not just on the field, but how the club was really run on a day-to-day basis. So he brought in professionalism, invested in infrastructure like the Sclessin Stadium, and insisted on excellence, which was fairly new in Belgium at that time. So Standard hit the top of Belgian football in the 50s and 60s with those big European games. And Roger Petit is really the architect and the mastermind behind this transformation. Huh?
We can really say Roger Petit built Standard, and he also somehow killed it. Because that's one mistake he did at the end that killed the golden era of Standard that was coming back in the early 80s. Without Roger Petit, there wouldn't be a Standard. Standard wouldn't be that big. He was really the man who made Standard what it was. Before Roger Petit, Standard was just a team that was in the first league, but didn't win titles, was just playing middle of the league. And he made this a good team, a big team, with the great support we still have today.
Yeah. He was really visionary. Huh? He had connection in Belgian football politics, and he was known for behind-the-scenes maneuvering. At that time, it was necessary to be successful in that connection with FIFA officials and media and other clubs. And he was really a visionary, because when he decided to hire Ernst Happel, for example, it was because of his willingness to bring Standard to another level. And it worked. And he also had the flair, the feeling to hire important foreign players like Asger Sigurðsson, Simon Tahamata, and so on. But we will maybe speak about these players later on. Huh?
Spoke to somebody who was a good friend of Henri de Pireux, who was a legendary player of the 60s and 70s. And Henri de Pireux told us Petit was tough. Petit today wouldn't be a great leader of a club because he wouldn't fit in the rules today with the Bosman after post-Bosman era, but he was tough. Some players had great opportunities to go to Madrid or to Barcelona or wherever, and because of the contract rules then, Roger Petit always said, no, you stay to Standard. You stick to Standard as long as I want you to stick to Standard. Yeah. He was tough. He was a tough guy.
As you said earlier, the decade of the 1970s was dominated by Anderlecht and Club Brugge, who were managed by Ernst Happel. Was this the hunger that led to the appointment of Ernst Happel himself, the Austrian manager, in 1979?
Once again, I talked with the people who know a bit more about this time. The rising star in coaching in Belgium at that time was Roger Wassège. He was from Liège. And Standard got him from Lokeren to Standard, where from the teams he was to Standard for 3 years, but he only managed to go to the third place. And Roger Petit was quite upset that he couldn't go further than third place. So yes, he tried really something to bring Ernst Happel, who had been very successful in other teams and in Bruges. So that was something he tried. It was also unsuccessful because he never managed to be champion. And that only came after Ernst Happel left. But it was some attempt to bring Standard to the top. Yes, definitely.
Yeah, bringing Happel in 1979 was just a coaching change. Huh? It was a real statement from Roger Petit. It sent a clear message to Anderlecht and Bruges. Standard wasn't just happy to exist in the shadows of the Belgian league, but wanted to compete head-to-head with Anderlecht, both in Belgium and in Europe. And, you know, at that time, Ernst Happel was considered as one of the best tacticians at that time. He had just won the European Cup with Feyenoord and taken the Netherlands to the World Cup final. So it was a huge name in the Belgian league. So it was a strong statement. Huh?
So what was the backbone of the team that Happel inherited in 79?
Well, he already had some stars that would still be in the team for the two titles in 82 and 83. Of course, Erik Gerrits was the leader of the team. He still had Sigurðsson from Iceland, who was also had been a Standard for 8 years. Many players of the 70s who were still there. So he had the team that basically Wassège had, and he tried to change the style of play. Standard was very, very offensive with Happel. Happel had a style that's all out, playing all out. So Standard had some very bad games lost with Happel, but also some very fancy victories. For example, they lost in pre-season 7-0 to Kaiserslautern and then beat them in European Cup, the same team. So Happel was very special, but he had a very strong team already at the beginning when he came to Standard, yes.
Yeah, you had, of course, Erik Gerrits that we mentioned, and Michel Rankin, tough defender, Michel Prudhomme was still young, but already showing signs that he would become a top goalkeeper. You had also Ralph Edström, a Swedish striker, then who went to Monaco afterwards. And in the summer of 1980, Petit added another masterpiece, Simon Tahamata from Ajax. So he brought speed, flair, and one-to-one skills to the team, and definitely that was a real good choice. So that was a strong team at that time, and Gutals inherited a very strong backbone after Apple departure. Yeah.
Yes, and you still have players like Gerard Plessers and Theo Poel in defense, the German Helmut Graf, who would
That's right.
return to manage later on in the decade. Guy van der Missen still there, others like Philippe Garot, Eddie Woerdekers.
Willy
And
Wellens.
There was
Also.
a mix of Belgian players who were really needed to work for the team, and you had international stars. So the mix was very good at that time,
yeah,
definitely.
and the Austrian striker Alfred Riedel, kind of the tail end of his career at this point.
Yes, Belgium could still attract stars from abroad at that time.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
we had a few, yes. All the teams in Belgium had a few stars from abroad.
And this coincides with the resurgence of the Belgian national team that includes some of these standard players, such as Gerets and Renkan in defense, who were famous for the efficient offside tactics of the national team. So, how was this parallel ascendance of the national team and that of Standard in the confidence that it gave to win the league in the years ahead?
It was not only Standard, it was all Belgium football. It was getting strong. Bruges had European finals, Anderlecht had European finals. They won some of them. Standard, even teams like Lokeren and Waterskei managed to have some great European games. All Belgian football was rising at that time. And Standard, of course, had very good players, especially in defense. So the whole team with Ludo Cook from Anderlecht and Van den Berg from Leers, and then he went later to Anderlecht also. There was really a strong team coming in Belgium at that time.
The rise of Standard Liège and the Belgium national team was far from being coincidental. In fact, the two were deeply intertwined, both in terms of personnel and collective belief. I would say that the growing proeminence of standard players in the national setup not only validated the club talent base, but also fostered a shared mentality of ambition, competitiveness, and legitimacy at the higher level. When you have players like Eric Gerets and Michel Rankin at the top level of the Belgium national team, then in the dressing room of Standard Liège, it brings international recognition, ambition, and a willingness of excellence that have boosted the whole club, I would say. Yeah?
For the 1980-81 season, this is Ernest Happel's second and last season at Standard. As you mentioned, Simon Tahamata comes aboard from Ajax, as well as Jos Darden, who came from Tongeren. In that season, Standard finished third to Anderlecht, but they do win the Belgian Cup by defeating Lokeren in the final. The club also advanced as far as the quarterfinals of the UEFA Cup, eliminating Kaiserslautern along the way, finally being eliminated by Köln in that infamous match where Michel Renkan made a Nazi salute. So, was there a feeling that the team was getting close to winning a title at this point?
There was a feeling that the team was getting better, was getting closer, yes. After hard times in the 70s, we even finished eighth position at some point. The team was getting closer and stronger. With all these Limburg players, Gerrit Spoel, Plessers, Darden, who came in, and then later Meres, also Flemish. It was really a strong defense and strong structure. The only people missing, and he came 1 year later, was Ariane, who was really the architect of the team. That was the one missing to make Standard really go the next step and win the league.
Yeah, at that time, the fan felt like a real breakthrough, the proof that the team was maturing, could bring home silverware again. It was kind of the first real reward for the work Happel had done, instilling a tactical discipline approach and professionalism into a squad full of young and talented players. So it was really the start of a new era. That's what we felt. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Ernest Happel later on said he failed to win the title because he didn't have a playmaker.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
Ariane.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was the one he was missing, Ariane, for this
Ariane
big
was the missing piece
experience.
of the puzzle. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah. You're right.
In the offseason 1981, Raymond Goethals was appointed as manager. He had been a former national team manager, but also former Anderlecht manager. How was his appointment received, and how different was he from Happel?
Yeah, there was a mix of reaction at that time in Liège. Huh? People were intrigued, hopeful, but also skeptical because, yeah, Guitars was one of the most respected tactical brains in Belgian football, but it was a bit complex guy who had a strong connection with Anderlecht. So it was difficult to welcome him as the Messi or the guy that will solve all of our problem. But his reputation of master tactician and pragmatic winner was really great. Huh? We must admit it.
Yeah, for lots of people, they knew he was the right person at the right place at the time, but the fact that he was spiritual son of Van den Stock family also made it a bit hard for him to be accepted immediately. Of course, when you win titles, you are accepted, but it was a bit hard because he has really that Brussels mentality, and even the way he speaks away from Brussels, definitely. So Gutas is very controversial. On one hand, he brought us titles. On the other hand, he's the one who initiated the idea that led to the scandal, because that's really
Yeah.
his idea. Wherever he went, he cheated. Unfortunately,
Exactly.
he was a genius, but a genius who somehow to win sometimes wanted to cheat.
Yeah, he was the wizard.
Yeah.
Now, before we get to the scandal, the 1981-82 season was perhaps the club's greatest season. Standard won the league title after more than a decade and also reached that infamous Cup Winners' Cup final against Barcelona, where Barcelona kicked their way into victory. As observers, how was this season regarded at the time? And let's mention some of the players that came aboard. You have the Dutchman Johnny Dusbaba came from Anderlecht, as did Arihan from Anderlecht, who would be the missing ingredient. Walter Muse came to bolster the defense. He came from Bruges, as did a Swedish veteran Benny Wendt from Kaiserslautern and the Swiss midfielder René Botteron from Köln. And you have players like Ralph Edstrom, the Portuguese Norton Matos. Michel Renkan is transferred to Anderlecht, as is the Icelandic Asger Sigurvinsson, who joins Bayern Munich, and Willie Wellens, who goes to Club Brugge. So there's a team overhaul. But like you said, the arrival of Ari Hahn and Walter Muse is what made all the difference in making this team into champions, who also impressed in Europe. I think they went unbeaten until the final and defeated the likes of Porto and the defending champions Dinamo Tbilisi in the semi-final. So all in all, a very good season. But of course, we know how the ending of the season was, which we'll get to.
Yeah, it was definitely, in terms of statistics, the best season of the club. There's nothing to say about that. But speaking about the team with my older friends, they say the team in the late 60s and 70s was even stronger, actually. It didn't get the same light, but in those days, this team could really win any game against any team in Europe. While that team of Standard of 82, yes, it had a great year, it had a great season, but a year later, that's almost the same team, was not that powerful in Europe, for example. It made a bad game against Juventus, even though that game against Juventus, it was missing and Gerets and Meus, both of them really important players in the defense. But yes, it was the best year statistically, but somehow some people think the team of the 60s, 70s was better, early 70s was better.
Yeah, I agree. And under Guttars, the team had become a kind of well-oiled, pragmatic machine, solid in defense, smart tactically, and ruthless when it counted. But that wasn't not only a good year, because at the beginning of the season, the results were not very good. And sometimes Guttars was on the defensive side. But the second part of the season was, of course, much better with René Botteron that you mentioned that came to improve the offensive side. That's why we remember today the title at the end of the season and the European results. But it was not an easy season at the beginning.
Just like in 1980 with the Euros, the 1982 Belgium World Cup squad contained many of those standard players that we mentioned. And Belgium did reasonably well in the World Cup. So that only added to Standard's great year with having all those players also participating in the good World Cup adventure, I imagine.
Yeah, we had even more players than in 1980, in 1982, because Meus was not yet in Standard in 1980, Darden was not yet in Standard, Van der Smissen was not yet in national team. So by 1982, we had really at least 1/3 of the team that was from Standard. And they had very good connections between them. And yeah, it was great for the team, of course, for the club to have so many players in the national team.
Yeah, and the famous opening game of the World Cup in Spain, where Belgium beat Argentina 1-0. That was a game that really put Belgium and Standard and also Anderlecht, we must admit, on the map. Huh? The core of the squad came from Standard and Anderlecht, bringing tactical smarts and a winning mentality both together. And that was really the good cocktail for the Belgium national team at that time for the World Cup in Spain.
The 1982-83 season was built up on the success of 1982. And Standard won the league title for the second consecutive season, though, as you said, they were less successful in Europe, where Juventus eliminated them in the Champions Cup. And the transfer activity was not as impressive. You have the Swedish defender Jan Eriksson. Willy Gertz came from Anderlecht, a striker. Little-known German player Hans Grundl joined from Waterschei. And the likes of the Swiss René Botteron left to join Nuremberg. Johnny Dusbaba left to join the Dutch league. Helmut Graf left a Standard as well, as did Eddie Woodekers, who joined Waterschei. Nevertheless, Standard won a tight league race. So how was this season's victory compared to the previous seasons?
Belgian championship was very tough in those years because Standard won with only 1 point ahead of Anderlecht and only very few points ahead of Antwerp, Ghent, and Bruges. It was a very, very tough championship. But the backbone of the team remained because Dusbaba didn't do well in Standard, actually. So it wasn't a great loss to lose Dusbaba. And the backbone of the team did very well. Grundl was a very good add-up to the team. I remember it very well. That's when I started to go to the stadium. So the team was really good. And the whole spirit around the team was very positive at that time. The only bad moment was that loss against Juventus, because we expected Standard to be stronger than that and even to be able to pass Juventus. But for the rest, Standard was really
because
a very
I think
good
the
move.
year before Anderlecht had eliminated Juventus, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes. Yes.
Right. But Juventus, there was a strong team with stars like Platini, Boniek, and Rossi. So it was a bit too high for Standard at that time. But okay.
And Meus and Gerets were missing in one of the games, and that changed really everything.
Yeah.
In those years, Belgian teams could face any European team and not be afraid.
And in fact, that season, Anderlecht would win the UEFA Cup, and Waterschei reached the semifinals of the Cup Winners' Cup.
Right, yes.
In the summer of 1983, Eric Gerets was transferred to AC Milan. Though the veteran West German striker Horst Hrubesch joined the club from SV Hamburg, who had just won the Champions Cup. In retrospect, was the loss of Gerets more significant, irrespective of the scandal on the horizon?
Gerets was a symbol of Standard. He had been there for so many years. He was there from 1971 to 83. So he was really the image of Standard. He was the lion, our lion with his big beard at that time. So yes, it was a big loss. But Hrubesch did very well, actually, at the beginning. And thank God we had him in the bad years because he was there for the younger players. And he was a star also. So he was the one who defeated Belgium actually with his header at the end of the final of European 80. So Rubesch was a big star. Gerets, of course, also. So that was, yeah. I would say the loss of Gerets was major than the signing of Rubesch. Anyway.
Yeah. I fully agree. Gerets was really the heartbeat of the team, a symbol of the team and of the fighting spirit of Standard Liège. And the arrival of Rubesch maybe masked some cracks in the team because the squad hadn't fully addressed other gaps, especially in defense and midfield, where key players like Sigurd Vincent, we mentioned it at Strum, and Rankin had already left previous season. So maybe it was a way to mask some failures in the squad, but it was a big name, and we were really pleased to have Rubesch in the team. He scored a lot of goals, and we were very pleased with having him on board, of course.
Each corner, the crowd was saying, Rubesch! For each corner, they was expecting a goal from him. Yeah. It was really his style. But, well, Gerets was released for all these years. Roger Petit finally released him with kind of a reward for all these years he spent with Standard. He came early in 71 and he waited until 82 and 83 to win titles. So it was kind of a reward for him to finally go somewhere else.
Yeah, and maybe it was because of what's coming next with the
Maybe
scandal.
they knew already what was coming next already, yes. But they didn't expect it to be found.
No.
This 83-84 season, it would be the season of the scandal. But ahead of that, as far as arrivals, in addition to Rubesch, you have the Luxembourg midfielder Guy Hellers, who would have a long career with Standard. You had the Yugoslav Zoran Jelicic in defense, came from Hajduk Split. Michel Vintak also was added to the defense. He came from crosstown rivals FC Liège. The players who left other than Gerets included the Swedish Jan Eriksson, Willy Gertz, more importantly, Ari Hahn, who joined PSV Eindhoven. That was a key loss. And also Benny Wendt also left the club. But as the season kicked off, I imagine it would have looked upon as this is just business as usual, as Standard is hoping for a third straight title.
At the beginning of the season, Standard was still top of the league, easily. It was easy, even an easier season than the two previous ones. They were really on top. And then the scandal came in February, and then they lost all key players who were involved in that. They were all suspended, and they had to use youngsters. Ehlers, as you said, made a great career Standard, a long career Standard, but he was just a teenager when he came, and he had to be put on the field, not being ready for this kind of pressure. So we finally ended up fourth, which was not that bad considering the team we had to fight to finish the season. But at the beginning of the season, it was an easy season.
Yeah. We ended up the season with a lot of young players, definitely with a lack of experience, and that was kind of a miracle to end up at the fourth place, definitely, yeah.
There's one player to mention who made history later. Jean-Marc Bosman started on that year as well in Standard.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, he was a part of the...
He was one of those who was promoted to the team because we needed it.
Yeah, he was part of a Belgium under-21 squad, I think, around this time. Yeah. Like you said, it's late February 1984. Belgium is preparing a friendly against West Germany. And in the national team camp, Eric Gerets is interrogated and the scandal comes to light. And not only it damaged the national team's prospects for the 1984 Euros, but it was a reference point of Standard's troubles into many decades. Can you shed some light on the Standard Waterschei scandal for anyone who might not know?
For the last game of the season, Standard only needed 1 point to secure the title. Only 1 point. And only if...
let's measure it's a 1981-82 season.
But Standard had to play the European Cup final 3 days later. And for Gutals, clinching the title at sporting expense became kind of obsession. And then he feared injuries or fatigue. So he asked some of the players like Gerets or Plessers to go and see their friend of Waterschei because they lived in kind of same village and they had the beers at the same bar and just asking them, okay, guys, can you please take it easy on Saturday for the game and we'll give you a few beers for free and everybody will be happy. So I think that's the story. I think it was routine in Belgium at that time for some clubs. I'm not saying that it was a good thing, but you have another.
Oh, yes. Right. So actually, as I said, I have connections with people who were very often with players of that time, of De Pireux and Semelin. And De Pireux, he played for Standard, but he also played for other teams, and he knew very well how the system worked, especially with the team of Brussels. I don't like to mention the name. And Goethals was like this. He went to Roger Petit and he said, if we don't do it, they will do it. We have to do something, because if we don't do it, they will definitely do something about that game, that last home game against Waterskei. And it was no point, because Standard was far above Waterskei, and Waterskei players had nothing to win anymore in this game. So I think it was pointless. It was really a big mistake, a stupid mistake from the part of Goethals and Roger Petit, who accepted it. Goethals went to convince him to say, I know how it works there in Saint-Guidon in Brussels. They will do it, because they always do it. That was their technique. They are very used to that. That's the usual business for them. So Goethals convinced Petit, and they did it. And it was the biggest mistake Petit ever did. As I said, he buried the team, the club, as he built himself with that. So they paid the players of Waterskei, who were all friends. Half of the team of Standard was from Limburg, the same area of Waterskei, and they knew each other.
Yeah, and in fact,
even family members.
Yeah, I mean, Gerard Plesser's brother, Pierre Plessers, played for
Exactly.
Waterschei.
Exactly.
And actually, Pierre Plessers was neighbors with Eric Gerrits, I think.
Exactly. They were all from the same region, and Darden was from there, and Theo Poel was from there also. They were many of the key players of Standard were from that area. So I don't think it was useful, and it ruins the club for many years after that.
Yeah, and in fact, I did a podcast recently on the Belgium national team in the 1984 Euros. So obviously, we touched up on this scandal, Affaire Bellemans, as it was called.
Right.
And in fact, the origins of it had nothing to do with football. It was a criminal investigation into something else
That's
that
right.
kind of led to this.
There was this little book, handwritten from Roger Petit, where he wrote the amount, and he said to Genk. He didn't even mention Waterskei. RC Genk didn't exist then, but it was already, Waterskei was located in what would become Genk, and he wrote 600,000 to Genk, and that's where it started from. And they found out, and it's good that they found out, because I don't like cheaters, but yeah, it prejudiced the Belgian team, prejudiced the Standard, and the Belgian football took years to recover. They had a very good run in 1986 in the World Cup, but after that, it took years for the Belgian team to recover, and Belgian football never was really the same after that.
Roger Petit and Raymond Goethals resigned. Leon Semmeling took over as interim manager. AC Milan, actually, they sacked Eric Gerrits when that happened. So there were many bans and suspensions. Obviously, for Standard, you have Jos Darden, Walter Muse, Theo Poel, Simon Tahamata, Michel Prudhomme, Gerard Plessers, Guy van der Missen, and Eric Gerrits, of course. And from Waterschei, you have Roland Janssen and Aimé Konen. They were also suspended. Some of these players chose to remain with Standard as they're serving their suspensions, like Poel, van der Missen, and Prudhomme, while others had to go elsewhere. I think Raymond Goethals had to go to Portugal, to Vitória Guimarães. And many players, their suspension was to end, I think, like in a year. So they joined other clubs, like Walter Muse joined Ajax, Tahamata joined Feyenoord, Gerard Plessers joined SV Hamburg, and Gerrits himself, he joined a small Dutch team, MVV, but of course he would later go to PSV Eindhoven. As far as the immediate aftermath, we know, of course, you just mentioned the team finished fourth, where maybe they could have aimed higher. But what was the immediate aftermath with Semmeling in charge?
It was pretty bad. It was all over the newspapers, all over TV all the time. Could only think about that. There was no football anymore. It was only the affair. We call it the affair. The Standard Waterskei was only speaking about that. And in all stadium of Belgium, we were booed.
Yeah.
Standard has always been that team that or you love it or you hate it, but it became even stronger at that time. Standard and OM, Marseille have very, very similar spirit. Or you love them or you hate them. And that became even worse. We were named cheaters everywhere. And yeah, it was a bad time. It was a very bad time. But
Yeah.
the supporters remained, many of them.
Yeah, there was a huge slide in competitiveness and lots of player turnover and a serious hit to the prestige of the club. That meant that Standard had to lean on younger guys and bring less well-known player just to fill the gaps. So the period was really rough and results were inconsistent and well, it was a difficult time starting.
Standard also reached the final of the Belgian Cup, but they lost that season. For the 1984-85 season, I imagine there would not be much expectations for Standard with all the suspensions, etc. So you have a new manager, the Yugoslav Milorad Pavic. As far as arrivals, you have Guy Dardenne, who came from Club Brugge, Freddy Lux from Sereng, unknown Dutch striker Roger Raven, as well as Eddie Snelders, a defender from Liège. But of course, that did not compensate for all the departures and suspensions of the key stars. Obviously, Standard can't spend money on stars. So, how would you describe this first post scandal season where, with all the troubles, Standard finished eighth? Did it seem like the struggle would continue longer than expected?
That was hard to say because we were really lost. On one hand, we had very big successes, recent successes, but the biggest change was not even on the field. The biggest change was in the office. There was no Roger Petit anymore, and the people who came instead of Roger Petit had no knowledge of football. So they just bought names. Guy Dardenne was an ex-Standard player. Eddie Snelders was a big name, but at the already ending almost his career. And they didn't really make a team. So it was not a good season. And it's mainly because we had lost managing expertise from Roger Petit, more than anything else.
Yeah. And as the season went on, it became clear that it wasn't just a short-term setback. We understood very clearly that it's going to be tough to be back on the top of the league.
Do you remember some of the suspended players like Prudhomme? How would they train during this suspension? I imagine they were perhaps allowed to play friendly matches, maybe.
I don't remember they were allowed to play a friendly game, but they trained with the team under Smithson and Prudhomme. And as soon as the suspension ended, they came back to the team, of course. Those who were still at the club would train with the others, but couldn't play any game.
Yeah.
Many of them left to other championships to be allowed to play because the suspension was only in Belgium.
The player kept quite a low profile because they didn't say much or try to make a big deal out of it because probably they wanted to stay under the radar because of the pressure of the media and the fans of other clubs. And it was a difficult time, definitely. Yeah. For them and for us.
For the 1985-86 season, Milorad Pavic is still in charge, and there's a somewhat of a resurgence. You have Alex Czerniatinski from Anderlecht joining the club, and later Nico Kleisen joins the club, as does Michel Rencan. And the team surprisingly will finish third. And as far as other arrivals, you have the Swiss forward Richard Mapuata, the Yugoslav striker Srebenko Repčić, among others. But you have the departures of players like Grundl and Hrubesch who go back to Germany. After this third place finish, was there hope for a brighter future, or was the season more of an anomaly as the team was clearly headed for a downward spiral?
I remember the signing of Czerniatinski, and it was a big hope. Yes, that season was a good one, considering what happened before. And yes, somehow some people thought, okay, that's over, let's go. Now we're going to move forward again. But I like what you said, for the year before, Pavic was a new coach. He was actually already a very old coach. He had been a successful coach in the 60s and 70s, but there he was already very, very old and somehow didn't manage to keep the team together. That was one of the problems. And he came back again later, actually, because he was faithful to Standard, but he was very old-fashioned already. He was not in the mood for the game of those years anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, it kind of felt like the club might be on the road to redemption that year, but it was a difficult time to stabilize the club on the financial side, and with the new guys at the management level like André Duchesne and Jean Wouters, they didn't have the deep pockets to stabilize the club, and that's why you had guys like Nico Klaassen that left to Tottenham, if my memory serves me well, because on the financial side we were really weak. Definitely, we cannot compete with the other teams in Belgium. So I think that's why that season was more a false down than a real revival, to my opinion.
For the 1986-87 season, like you said, it was clear that Standard could not compete for the top spots, as not only were Anderlecht and Club Brugge ahead of them, but now there's a new player, Mechelen. In fact, reinforced by Michel Prudhomme, among others, and Walter Muse. Now, there's a new manager with the West German Helmut Graf being appointed, but he was powerless in the club's decline as they finished 10th. And as far as the arrivals, you have another Luxembourg player, Jeff Saban, and the Yugoslav Vladimir Petrovic, who early in the decade was one of the greatest prospects in European and world football, but who by now was a shadow of the player that he once was. And he clearly was unable to help Standard, this Standard at least. And the likes of Dardenne, Poel, later Clayson, and of course Prudhomme, they all had left the club. The team finished 10th. Was this a season where the reality became clear that Standard was no longer the same team?
Definitely. But I will tell you something. That's the season when I started to take season tickets. That's when it was thought that I said, now I'm going to go to all the games. I was old enough to go, and I said, whatever happens, I'll go anyway. Sometimes we were 6,000, 7,000. For the big games was more, but yeah, there was still crowd, but it was a bad season, definitely. Bad games and change of coaches during the season. And yeah, it was a hard season, and next one would be the same, actually.
And during this season, I remember reading that the Olympique Marseille president, Bernard Tapie, was thinking of investing in Standard Liège. Was there any truth to this?
Yeah, exactly. That's not a rumor. It isn't just some tale people tell. It's there's actually truth behind it, and even if it is a bit outlandish. In the fall of '86, Bernard Tapie seriously thought about investing in Standard Liège. Standard was in a pretty shaky financial spot, still feeling the fallout from the scandal. They were looking for fresh money to stabilize things and plan for the future. So Tapie was charismatic, ambitious. Marseille sometimes is compared to Liège. So the connection was quickly made in the media and in the business cycles around Liège. So the flirting got pretty serious. Huh? Philippe?
He came several times to Liège. He came to FC Liège at the beginning, actually, because of what would become their very big manager for us, Donofrio. He was already very important in football, European football. And Donofrio actually was supporter of FC Liège at the beginning. So he tried to bring Tapie to FC Liège, but Tapie saw no passion in Liège. While in Standard, even a bad Standard was still having more aura than FC Liège. So Tapie leaned more on the side of FC Liège, but he was not the only one. There was also an American Yugoslavian potential investor called Milan Mandaric. Thank God he didn't come, because it would have been the same time as the one we had recently, American investors who ruined the Standard the last years. But he was not the only one interested in Standard, because Standard still had a pretty good reputation, even though they had the scandal, but it was a team that has history. So people were interested in Standard anyway, and a weak and cheap Standard was a good potential for investors.
Yeah. And so that whole episode with Bernard Tapie remains a kind of fascinating what if in the club history, a crazy idea that might have changed everything, but never quite did. So
You would have saved 10 years.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
The 1987-88 season was another unstable year as Standard finished 10th again and went through three managers. You have the season starting with René Desire, I think that's how it's I'm sorry if that's correct.
The tire.
Yeah, Desire. Yeah. Sorry
That's
about
hard names. Yes.
pronunciation. Yeah. Then you have in October Milorad Pavic returning to the club until March, and then Joseph Liers ended the season. This is a season where Standard would reach the final of the Belgian Cup, but they would lose to the Anderlecht managed by Raymond Goethals. As far as arrivals, you have the Yugoslav Zoran Bojovic from Cercle Bruges, unknown Brazilian Claudinho from Beerschot, and Dimitri Mbuyu from Lokeren. So again, these are not the high-profile signings of the beginning of the decade. Was this, in a way, Standard's worst period in the decade?
Yeah, definitely this season felt like rock bottom. It was chaos, regression, and no hope on the horizon. The decision looked more improvisation and guesswork, totally disconnected from the club proud tradition. And then we lost the Belgian Cup final against Anderlecht and against Goethals. So could haven't been worse, I would say.
Hard to be worse, exactly. Losing to Gutters, knowing all the harm that he did to the club, it was really tough. I was in the stadium in Brussels for the final, and I can tell you the atmosphere was bad, bad, bad.
Yeah, me
But
too.
we were also the black sheep of the Belgian football since the scandal, and many referees had tendencies also just to, if they were not sure about the decision, it was always against Standard, and we saw that in the final. It was horrible. It was horrible to be a Standard fan at the moment, but also you felt like you were part of something. You were all alone against the world.
We like that, to be alone against the whole world.
For the 1988-89 season, the veteran Belgian manager Urban Brems is appointed in a way to stop the rot. In his only season at the club, there's a slight improvement as the team finished sixth and just outside of the UEFA Cup places. But again, they lose the Belgian Cup final to Anderlecht of Raymond Goethals. As far as arrivals, you have the likes of Benoit Tans, who came from Lens in France. You have Paul Lambrix, the defender from Beveren. You have the Tunisian Jamaluddin Liman, the Yugoslav defender Lubomir Radanovic, the Israeli striker Ronnie Rosenthal from Club Brugge, who would later join Liverpool, and another Israeli striker, Shalom Tikva. As far as departure, Zoran Bojovic leaves after one season. Jean-Marc Bosman joins FC Liège. You have Dimitri Mbuyu joining Club Brugge, Michel Renquin joining Sion. Srebenko Repčić also leaves the club. There's a slight improvement on the team's fortunes, but it's not enough. So why do you think Brahms did not stay longer if he had improved the team somewhat?
He was old-fashioned.
Yeah.
He had his good years before with Beveren, with Anderlecht, with other teams, and won titles. But he was a big uncle in the changing room, but he didn't have the strength to keep it all together. That's what I'm feeling. But I love that team, actually. Some of the players there, I love them. I was so fan of Shalom Tikva and Rosenthal, for example, and also Liman. We had actually a fun team to watch at that time. It was a fun team to watch playing.
But these guys were not winners.
No, exactly. No.
So we missed out the European qualification, and the club's real objective was to get back in Europe and maybe regain some prestige and find some extra cash. But finishing at the sixth place and losing another cup final wasn't enough to satisfy the ambition of the club. So that's why I think Bram was replaced by Kessler afterwards. Yeah.
I remember very well that season. All the time during the second half of the season, one day we were in, next game we were out of the European seats. So it was all season like that. Losing, out. Winning one game, we were in again. It was all like that all the time, all from January till April. It was all the time like that, in, out of European Cups. Very stressful season, but interesting. Yeah.
So we come to the end of the decade, and in the offseason 1989, the West German George Kessler is appointed to lead the club into this new decade. But the reality is that at best, the team can barely qualify for the UEFA Cup. Was that clear for all the fans at the club at this point?
At least we managed to get to UEFA Cup. That was already an improvement. Was it a year we also beat Ghent 5-1 in the return game of the Cup? I think so. We also had, I think, Henk Vos, who joined on that year.
Henk Vos joined. Yeah,
Yeah.
Henk Vos joined later in the season from
So
Beerschot. Yeah.
personally, I felt some improvement. Maybe not in the results, but in the way and the spirit and the general atmosphere around the club. Supporters were slowly coming back, but the management at the top of the tier of the club was still very poor.
Yeah.
But yeah, we somehow were slowly going back in the league.
But the fans were also more pragmatic, and the dream of winning titles wasn't alive. So we were supporters and we were loyal, but we had little expectation. That was maybe easy and we were satisfied with a European Cup qualification and beating Anderlecht. That was the objective.
And you also have the arrivals of the Mexican striker Carlos Hermosillo. Also, Mark Schassens joins from Beerschot.
Schassens is very talented. Yes, I like him very much.
But you have the departures of the likes of Zhinatinsky, Jeff Saban, and later Paul Lambrix rejoins Beveren as well. And also towards the end of the season, Rani Rosenthal joins Liverpool and helps them win the title with his goals.
Yeah.
So a decade that had started so brightly ended in disappointment. Why do you think Standard were unable to recover from the Standard Waterschei scandal, while other teams may have been able to rebuild? If you look at some of the scandals, and some teams are able to somewhat rebuild, but somehow Standard were unable to. Why do you think?
Yes, Standard was hit hard and fast. So no clear plan, no rebuilding structure, just chaos. And yeah, having the biggest blow was losing Roger Petit, as we said earlier. So that was a bit too much for a club like Standard, who's not in Belgium a powerful economic institution in comparison with Anderlecht and Bruges and the power of Brussels and the Flanders. So it was a bit too much for Standard, I think.
Yeah, unlike big teams that had this problem also like Juventus and AC Milan and others, we didn't have the financial power and we didn't have the people, the management to make the Standard grow again very quickly. So yeah, we had to go very long to get good years again. Actually, it only came back in the early 2000 years with Donofrio. Yeah. All the other years were just all the time ups and downs, ups and downs. And one of the hardest part was to go so many years without winning at home against Anderlecht, actually. I don't know if do you agree with me?
Exactly, yeah. Fully agree.
So you think it was only in the 2000s where the scandal was in the rearview mirror?
I think so, yeah. For me, it will never be in the rear mirror. It will always be there. But the team then went over it, yes.
Do younger fans of the club know of this scandal and its impact, or is it only mainly older fans? And if so, how is this scandal part of the identity of the fans of that era?
At Standard Liège, that story still runs deep. Supporters, old and young, have this real sense of belonging and identity passed down through generations. So even younger fans didn't live through it. They still know about the scandal, I guess. Not just as some dusty history lesson, but as core part of the club's collective memory is all about. There's this powerful narrative among the fans that Standard was used as a scapegoat, that they paid the ultimate price for something that honestly wasn't all that unusual in Belgian football back then.
Exactly.
So that's the narrative between the supporters, old and young. But yeah.
I talked to my son, who is also, well, he's trying to become a professional now, and he's sometimes goes with me to Standard, though he's a big fan of Barcelona. But I told him about the story, but they don't realize the extent it had at that moment. They don't realize how strong Standard was before that and how bad it fell just after that. So, but they know about it usually. And even after so many years, fans of other teams always remind us, especially those from the other team of the city, FC Liège, they all still call us cheaters. So yes, from time to time, it still comes back in the talks. And it will never fade for me. It will still be something terrible that happened to the team, but it's part of the identity of Standard to have survived this anyway. We could have been in the second division. Fortunately, we didn't have that, so we still have that record to be the oldest team in the first division without ever going to the second division. That's almost our only record we still have. And yes, I'm very proud to have been Standard fan in those years for myself.
Me too, yeah.
The Standard Liège kits of like 1981 through 1985 with a Le Coq Sportif are immediately emblematic of this great era. Are these kits also considered as classic by kit collectors that you know of?
Not for me. I remember the mythical Maaspils kit and then the Nagelmakers, the local bank kit, but not to an extent that I would go anywhere and pay any price to get it. Not to, now in the business that they have to change kits every year to sell more kits, doesn't matter to me.
These kits represent more than fashion, I would say. They encapsulate a moment in time when Standard was not just great, but glorious. So for many supporters, these t-shirts are sacred relics of the club's most thrilling years, and they combine the elegance, simplicity, and identity, and that's why they are important for supporters, I guess. Yeah.
Despite his role in the scandal, is Eric Gerrits regarded as the most emblematic player of this great era?
Of course, he's there at every game. He's sick, he's got very big health issues, but he's there at every game at home, and it's his home forever.
Yeah. There is only one lingering regret among supporters that Gerrits never returned as head coach of Standard despite his exceptional managerial career. But
Totally true, yes.
planets were never aligned for him to come as head coach for Standard, and that's an eternal regret for supporters. Yeah, because he's part of the living heritage of the club, definitely. Yeah.
So for young and old fans, this 1980s era will always be honored by the fans, I imagine, to this day.
No, you can't forget that era. Ups and downs, so big, so far high, so high, and then so far down. You can't forget that era. Now we're going more or less through the same era now. We had very high 15 years ago, and we are very low now.
It's an era marked by glory, scandal, passion, and resilience, and for that reason, it's unforgettable. Yeah.
And not just Eric Gerrits, but the other heroes of this era. I imagine they're still well received by the Standard Liège faithful these days.
All of them are always welcome. All of them. The only one I wouldn't welcome, but he's dead now, is Gutas.
Getting back to the scandal itself, did the titles in 2008 and 2009 kind of put that era? I know you mentioned for you it's still somewhat present, but in general for the club, do you think those titles in 2008 and 2009s were kind of like a break from the past in a way?
It was a relief, actually. We had some years where we finished second, and we were leading the league for many and always finishing second. And I remember very well this first of the two titles, because there were many Brazilians, and I had a Brazilian restaurant at that time, and many of them would come and eat regularly at my restaurant. So Igor de Camargo, Dante, Marcos Camozzato, they were friends, and they are still today. And we were all panicking. We saw the games at the end of the season. We saw Anderlecht at home, then go to Charleroi. And I had this nightmare that we might lose both games and Anderlecht would come back and pass us again, like they did several times. And I said, no, he's not going to come back again, not again. And I remember Dante saying, don't worry, we are so much stronger. Don't worry, it won't happen again. So it was a relief. That night of 22nd of April 2008 was such a relief.
In closing, what is the legacy of the Standard side of the 1980s in the history of Belgian football as it encompassed the good, the bad, and everything in between?
Belgian football without Standard is not the same. Bruges is strong. Bruges has become very strong. Before 1970s, Bruges was nothing. But without a strong Standard, Belgian football is not the same.
Yeah, I fully agree, of course. And in that sense, the Standard side occupies a singular place in Belgian football history, not only for what it won or lost, but for what it represents. The heights of a provincial club could reach, the danger of crossing certain limits, certain lines, and the enduring power of a community to rally around its heroes. I think that's kind of a legend that runs through history.
The Belgian national team became stronger recently, also because we had strong Standard with Witsel, Fellaini, Batshuayi, and few others. When Standard is strong, Belgian football is strong.
With that, I would like to thank both of you for your participation in this interview and sharing of your memories. All our respective contact information is listed on the blog and podcast uploads. So thank you, Philippe. Thank you, Gery, and hope to continue these discussions on football history.
Thank you. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
Philippe.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it.